I tried to tell a dad joke at community missions last week. It didn't go over very well, but I think it may have been because those people who come to our shower ministry didn't know that I was trying to tell them a joke. So I'm warning you, I'm going to try to tell a dad joke. You don't have to laugh. Feel free to groan and roll your eyes and say, "Oh, Dad," just like my daughters do. But here it is. Ready? I heard that the company that makes yardsticks isn't going to make them any longer. They're not going to make them any shorter, but they're not going to make them any longer, right? Okay. Not a great joke, but when I was telling it in community missions last week, I remembered a sermon that I preached years and years ago to a group of high school students in the hills of eastern Kentucky. It was called The Secret of Success, and I began by talking about a yardstick, how the numbers go from 1 to 36 on one side, but if you flip it over, they go from 36 to 1. I said, if you're measuring on one side, you might think you're doing pretty well. You might say, look at me, I'm up to 32 inches. But if you turn the yardstick over, you find that you're only at 4. So I told them the secret of success depends on who gets to measure your success. On one side, the yardstick measures your success by the world's standards, and everybody knows how you're doing. But the other side of the yardstick measures by the kingdom's standards. And really, only Jesus knows how you're doing. In the end, however, He's the one who gets to decide whether you have been a success or a failure. So you might want to try living by His standards. What are His standards? Well, we get a clue in today's gospel lesson. Luke tells us that Jesus was invited to the home of one of the leaders of the Pharisees for a meal on the Sabbath day. While he was there, he noticed how the other guests chose the places of honor, and he told them what Luke calls a parable. When you are invited by someone to a wedding banquet, he said, do not sit down at the place of honor in case someone more distinguished than you has been invited by your host. And the host who invited both of you may come to you and say, give this person your place. And then in disgrace, you would start to take the lowest place. But when you are invited, go and sit down at the lowest place so that when your host comes, he may say to you, friend, move up higher. Then you will be honored in the presence of all who sit at the table with you. For all who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. This parable provides us with a glimpse into the social world of Jesus. In first century Palestine, honor and shame weren't just personal feelings, they were public realities. Someone has referred to them as the social currency of the time. If you had been living in that time, in that part of the world, you might have done everything you could to acquire honor and avoid shame. How would you do it? Here are some examples. You could acquire honor by sitting close to the host or being invited to a prestigious meal. In that same category, to host a banquet and invite people of equal or higher rank was an honor-building move. You could acquire honor by being greeted with titles of respect in the marketplace, rabbi, master, or by having your lineage praised when someone pointed out that you came from a well-known family. In those days and in that part of the world, you could acquire honor through the public display of religious devotion by giving alms to the poor, praying in public places, or fasting in visible ways. A pilgrimage to Jerusalem or participation in temple worship would also serve you well. You could acquire honor by acting as a patron, by providing loans, employment, or protection, especially if those who were dependent on you praised you in return. And finally, you could acquire honor through your bravery, by defending your family honor, standing up in disputes, even fighting. Winning an argument in public was a huge honor boost. On the other hand, people could fall into shame by being asked to move to a lower seat in front of everybody at a fancy banquet, which was exactly Jesus' parable, or by not being invited at all. In your own family, you could be disgraced by having a daughter who became pregnant outside of marriage, or a son who abandoned family obligations and squandered his inheritance. Think of the prodigal son. You could experience religious shame by being accused of breaking the law of Moses or by neglecting purity practices. Suffering from a visible disability or disease was often interpreted as God's judgment on sin. You could experience financial ruin by losing land, defaulting on debts, or having to sell yourself or your children into servitude. Poverty wasn't just hardship in those days, it was shame. And finally, you could experience public insult or defeat by losing an argument in the synagogue or the marketplace, or by being struck or mocked publicly without having an opportunity to defend yourself. Some of those things will sound familiar to you just from reading the Gospels, and some of them have carried over into our time and place. We don't talk much about honor and shame anymore, but we do talk about success and failure. And success is often followed by money. Not always, but often. I know some very successful public school teachers who aren't being paid nearly what they're worth. Whether you're a famous singer or a football player, part of the way we know that you have made it is if you are rich. And there are people who are famous for being rich. We don't always care how they made their money, even if they made it in the most despicable way imaginable. In our society, wealth equals honor and poverty equals shame, doesn't it? So maybe there is still something to be learned from Jesus' story about people jockeying for the best positions at a banquet table. Maybe these days they are jockeying for something else. Maybe they're trying to make as much money as they can because money translates into success, and that's what they want to be. The most successful person in any room they enter. But Jesus says, no, that's really not what it's all about. You're looking at the wrong side of the yardstick. And then he turns to his host, the one who honored him by inviting him to the banquet, and says, when you give a luncheon or a dinner, do not invite your friends or your brothers or your sisters or your relatives or your rich neighbors, you know, the people we usually invite, in case they may invite you in return and you would be repaid. But when you give a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind, and you will be blessed because they cannot repay you, for you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous. In those upside-down instructions, Jesus dismantles the old honor system and, by extension, our wealth system. He makes it clear that in God's kingdom, tables are reordered. Value isn't determined by social standing or financial capability. It's rooted in God's radical hospitality, God's amazing grace. And God seems to have invited everyone to his table. When I preached on this passage several years ago, I said, imagine walking into the banquet hall in God's kingdom and seeing God himself sitting there at the head table. Where would you take your seat? Near the head or near the foot? I don't know what you would do, but I think I would position myself as far away from God as possible. Not because I don't love him, but because I wouldn't feel worthy. But have you noticed that in Jesus' parable, it's not the guest who gets to decide how worthy he is. It's the host. And since it's the host who gets to decide how worthy you are, it doesn't matter what you think of yourself. It only matters what he thinks of you. And he thinks you belong. I keep thinking about how God said to Jesus at his baptism, "You are my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased." Can you imagine what that did for Jesus? He didn't ever have to wonder about his own worth. He was the beloved Son of God. And because he knew who he was, he didn't have to look for validation from any other source. Who cares about places of honor at a banquet? If you're the beloved Son of God, you can sit wherever you want because you're not trying to be somebody. You already are. John Claypool once said that if we could hear God say those words to us, "You are my beloved child," it would change our lives. But God has said those words to us. In John chapter 1, it says that Jesus came to his own people and his own people wouldn't receive him. But to those who did receive him, to those who believed in his name, he gave the power to become the children of God. In 1 John 3, verse 1, it says, "What we will be is not yet apparent, but we are already God's beloved children. See what love the Father has given us, that we should be called his." Can you see how that sets you free? If you are one of God's beloved children, you don't have to look for validation from any other source. Your ticket has already been stamped. Your card has already been punched. This sermon is called "The Spirit Kneels," and at first I thought it would be about kneeling in humility. But the more I looked at this passage, the more it seemed to be about hospitality, about the Spirit kneeling to serve as Jesus kneeled to wash his disciples' feet. When you don't have to prove yourself anymore, you might find that you have the freedom to do something like that, or host a banquet for the poor, the blind, the lame, and the maimed. In fact, for the first time in your life, you might find that you are actually able to give a party, as in give it away. You might do it because you are a child of God, and it's the kind of thing God would do. He would be generous to people who are needy. He would pour out blessing on those who don't deserve it. He would do it just because it's in his nature to do such things, and maybe just because it's fun. The late Tony Campolo said that once when he was visiting Honolulu, he woke up in the wee hours of the morning hungry and ready for breakfast. Blame it on the 6-hour time difference, he said, but at 3:30 in the morning, I was wandering up and down the streets of Honolulu looking for something to eat. He finally found a Greasy Spoon restaurant and was sitting at the counter eating a donut when the door swung open and in walked 8 or 9 provocative and boisterous prostitutes, much to his discomfort. They sat on either side of him. Their talk was loud and crude. He was just about to make his getaway when he heard one of them say, "Tomorrow's my birthday. I'm going to be 39. Her friend said, "So what do you want me to do about it? Bake you a cake? Sing you a song? Throw you a party?" She said, "Why do you have to be so mean? I'm not asking you for anything. I'm just telling you, that's all. Why should you give me a party? Never had a birthday party in my whole life. Why should I have one now?" Campolo says that in that moment he made a decision. And when the women had left, he called over the guy behind the counter. "Do they come in here every night?" he asked. "Yeah," the man said. His name was Harry. "The one next to me," Campolo went on. "Does she come here every night?" "Yeah," he answered. "That's Agnes." "Why do you want to know?" "Because I heard her say that tomorrow is her birthday. What do you say you and I do something about that? What do you think about us throwing a party for her right here tomorrow night?" "Yeah." Harry said, Yeah, that would be good." At 2:30 the next morning, Campolo was back at the diner decorating it from one end to the other. Over the grill there was a huge poster that said, "Happy Birthday, Agnes." He said word must have gotten out on the street, because by 3:15 every prostitute in Honolulu was in the place. "It was wall-to-wall hookers and me," he said, "a Baptist minister." But at 3:30 on the dot, here came Agnes, and the place erupted with shouts of "Happy Birthday!" She was stunned, speechless. She wobbled to the counter and sat down in front of a huge cake with her name on it. "Go ahead," said Harry, handing her a knife. "Cut the cake." And without taking her eyes off it, she said, "Is it all right with you if I mean, could I? What I want to ask is it okay if I keep the cake a little while? If I don't cut it right away?" "Well, sure," Harry said. "Take it home with you." And she did. She got up off her stool and slowly carried her cake out of the diner like it was the Holy Grail. In the silence that followed, Campolo said, "Let us pray." Looking back on it, he said, "It seems strange for a sociologist from Philadelphia to be leading a prayer meeting with a bunch of prostitutes at a diner in Honolulu at 3:30 in the morning." But at the time, it seemed like just the right thing to do. When he finished, Harry leaned over the counter and said, "Hey, you never told me you were a preacher. What kind of church do you belong to?" And in one of those moments, when you find just the right words, Campolo answered, "I belong to a church that throws parties for prostitutes at 3:30 in the morning." "No, you don't," Harry said. "There's no church like that. But if there was, I'd join it. I'd join a church like that." Wouldn't we all? A church where everybody is somebody and nobody is better than anybody else. A church where you don't have to prove yourself anymore because God knows everything about you and loves you anyway. A church where Jesus himself pulls out a chair for you at the banquet table and says, "Friend, have a seat." Yeah, I'd join a church like that, and maybe you would too.